Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Braitch, and this is the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I am an emotional health and leadership coach and co-founder of the not-for-profit Seen and Heard, which supports those seeking healing, connection, and systemic change. My vision is to move myself and the world around me towards connection and compassion. And each week, I will connect with amazing guests who are on their journey to bring about meaningful change in their own lives and the world around them. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. Before we start this week's episode, I want to offer a gentle warning. This episode contains detailed accounts of child abuse and other traumatic experiences. Please listen with care and honour your boundaries. Thanks very much. Welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I have the great privilege today of being joined by Robert Montagu. Robert Montagu was sexually abused as a child by his father over many years. He went on to advise children in school about avoiding sexual harassment and gave advice at the Independent Inquiry into Child Sex Abuse about the need for mandatory reporting. He wrote a memoir in 2014 entitled A Humour of Love to examine the whys and wherefores of familiar abuse and became a child therapist himself in 2004. He also set up a charity to help children in the UK Southwest region to access low-cost counselling to assist mental health disorders. This ran for 20 years and helped thousands of families. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's lovely for us to connect today. We had a full start, didn't we, on the first one with a bit of technology, but we've worked our way through and we're raring to go today, so that's great.
Well, I'm getting a decent service now online.
Perfect. Beautiful. And we connected, it was John Wedger, wasn't it, who put us together?
Was it? I'm not certain.
Yeah, I think so.
Was it?
Yeah, we did a podcast with John maybe six to 8 weeks ago, something like that, and he put us together, and we've been chatting since. So yeah, it's really great that you've made the time, and looking forward to getting into it today.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I always like to start the podcast with kind of going back to the beginning where it all began. So I'd love it, Robert, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your personal journey through your early years and how things were for you.
So my mother and father married in 1936, and she was only 18 and he was 10 years older and had already become a member of Parliament. And they had 7 children together. And I was the last. I was born in 1949. And they then separated and then divorced in 1955. So I never saw my parents together. They were always providing us with holidays separately. And when I went to see my father, I was with other children, but never with my mother. And I got into the habit from the age of 6 of running to his room to hear a story. And he told lovely stories of his own invention, apart from reading. And he started to cuddle me more and more sexually until I was 7, 8, 9. And it got more and more intense as time went on, every time I went to his room. So 2 weeks in every holidays, I would be there, if not more. And I thought I was standing in for my mother in a way. I didn't feel as though it was terribly wrong to allow him to do what he wanted, provided I didn't have to do anything myself. I just lay still as a little statue. And so we went on quite happily until I was aged just 11, and it became steadily more intense as time went on, and the ultimate kind of rape happened at that stage, and then it was discovered by a sister. She went to find me when I was having a bath and called out my name, and my father was sharing the bath, and so she realized that we were there together, and she told other sisters, and I was interviewed kind of late at night, sitting up in bed, Um, and I told exactly the things that had happened. And my mother was then told, and she called a meeting when I got back to London with the family doctor, and they kind of interrogated me closely about what had happened. And I told them everything down to the last detail. But I was very upset, of course, and I ran out of the room crying. Uh, and then I went back to school the next day, as you do, to preparatory school, thinking that the police would arrive at any minute to interview me to get all the details, and my father would go on trial. But of course, that never happened because they decided within the family that it was much better to keep quiet. And so no action of any kind was taken against my father, except that my brother went to warn him that he should not do that kind of thing again. But then after the summer, I took a long summer break with my mother and one of my sisters, traveling around Greece in a ship, which was wonderful. And then as soon as I got back to see my father, um, he would pester me to start again, not in quite the same way, in bed in the morning, but after lunch, resting in his study and so forth. And I had to refuse. But there was no backup coming from the other children in the family, and I felt very isolated. And nothing had been done, and I really felt terribly upset about that. And I felt more and more suicidal. In fact, I went to. I was a head chorister in church, and so I had a very important role in the business of the church, and I sang the solos and so forth. And I had this extraordinary moment when I came out of church when I was 11 3/4, having planned to go and jump in front of a bus. Um, and I heard this thunderous voice in the rafters of the church saying, "This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased." And I didn't know what to make of it because I felt as though I had no worthwhile qualities at all. Um, but somehow I must have projected it in some way, but I don't understand how, unless, God was there listening and speaking. So I started doing good things in school and making myself feel better by helping kids to get through the day. But it was a long journey.
Oh, Robert, thank you for sharing so honestly, and my heart is with you and with the little boy, who had to go through that. And you say there was no protection for you. There was no one there. It was decided to keep it quiet, which I know very sadly, whether it's in institutions or in families, that the reputational stuff and things like that comes into it. What was your sense for why it was kept quiet? Was it felt that it could be handled in the family, or was
Well, I think it was a mixture of things. It was partly the fact that my father was quite a well-known man, a member of parliament and quite distinguished in his way. He was also a major landowner, and so there were a lot of tenant farmers and other people who were dependent on him. But also there was a belief that the newspapers would tell the story, of course, and that I would then be pestered by journalists at a very unsuitable age for that. And they wanted to spare me that kind of indignity, I guess, and spare the family that indignity as well.
Mm, mm, thank you, Robert. Thank you. And then hearing how powerful that voice in church was, someone that
Hugely powerful.
hugely.
And I felt the effect of it for weeks afterwards, like a sort of warmth, as I was lit up inside.
Mm,
And as I said, I started doing good things. I started singing to the new boys, who were trying to get to sleep and missing their parents. I was sing them to sleep and
mm,
things of that sort. And then, of course, when I started at more senior school, when I was not quite 13, I started listening to kids' stories about their unhappiness again. And that became quite a major part of my school life. I had
mm,
files on different boys and what was tormenting them. And a lot of it was sexual oriented, not because of masters, but because of older boys. And that all started when I was about 15, and I found a new boy on the stairs crying, and I asked him what was the matter, and he said, I don't dare to go to my room. And so I took him up to my room to listen to his story a bit more in detail. And he said, if I go to my room, I will be set on by a group of second years who are tormenting me. And I said, well, what do they want from you? And he said, well, they want to undress me and parade me down the corridors to show to everybody that I'm not physically mature. And I made the mistake of boasting that I had pubic hair and so forth. And they want to prove to the world that I don't have. And so I said, well, let me fix this. And I went to talk to the group of second years, and they said, well, sorry, but this is what we want to do. And we've told him we're going to do it. And I said, well, what we'll do is I will get a little team and we'll stand guard to make sure it doesn't go too far. And you can, undress him, but you can't parade him down the corridors. You can just prove the truth, if you really want to yourselves, that he is immature. And then leave it at that. And after that, leave him alone. And that's what we did. And for him, it was a great blessing because he was being allowed to go to his room. He was able to study. And it just went on from there. There was another boy who had developed breasts, and he wanted me to bind him up before he went off to play in a soccer or rugby match, because otherwise he would be seen. There was another boy who was being visited by the head boy of the house at night, and it hadn't yet become sexual, but it was going that way. And so I had the idea of getting a girlfriend from another school to write him a fan letter saying, I really want to meet you, and I'm going to come to our 4th of June, your 4th of June party, and introduce myself to you. And I thought that would be useful. So he received a scented letter in the post. And after that, he stopped molesting, or at least heading towards molestation of this junior. And it just went on like that. And there was another boy who'd been seriously actually raped by 2 much older boys. And he wanted to commit suicide. And I would go to his room and stay there to just stop him from going out of the window, and try to distract him with thoughts of holidays and deep sea diving and all of that sort of thing.
Wow.
And eventually we had a confrontation with another person who'd also abused him later in his school life. And we had a kind of kangaroo court with about 12 people in the room. And I had someone kind of prosecute, like a kind of prosecuting counsel. And this boy eventually confessed and apologized for indecent action himself against this boy, and he started to recover. And so we just carried on like that. And eventually I was told that I was going to get into trouble and be sent to the headmaster to be beaten because I wasn't studying enough. I was spending too much time doing psychotherapy. I went to see one of the housemasters. I went to complain to him that one of his new boys was in danger because I'd heard on the grapevine that he might be attacked, and he had to put a guard on him to look after him. And of course, he told the headmaster about this experience, and that was another complaint. So I did go to the headmaster, and I was beaten. But what they did do was to set up a Dominican friar, a Franciscan friar, who worked alongside me in the corridors of the house. And the plan was he was going to go from house to house in different terms. And so he took the left side and I took the right in a kind of way. but it all eventually got too much for me. I just couldn't bear the amount of pressure on me with people in distress of one kind or another. And I finally ran away in my beginning of my fourth year, thinking I've got to get out of here. I've got to normalize, and I've got to find a decent life out of school.
Thank you, Robert. I've got so much coming up, so much emotion, and just the vulnerability of the pupils in the school. That analogy sometimes is it's like Lord of the Flies in these schools. There's not many teachers around. There's the older pupils are kind of used as supposedly a peacekeeping force who are there to keep order in the houses and things like that. But ultimately, when the older pupils are predating on the younger pupils, whether it's sexually or just for violence, for fagging system, for bullying, etc., it's completely lawless. So the fact that you had to take it upon yourself to become a mediator and a counsellor for the houses, just it beggars belief. It really does. But can you see now? I mean, as a therapist now who's worked with many young people, can you see in yourself what happened as a survival strategy, if you like, to your younger self? What sort of switched on, and that sort of put you out into helping others?
Well, the initial switch was coming out of chapel with God speaking from the rafters or whatever else it was. But then I discovered that writing was an enormous release, and sitting down to write as often as I could, nearly pretty much every day from a certain age, it just helps to release the tension. And you can write about some of the stuff which is aggravating you, and get it out of the system. So that was an enormous help in itself. And then when I settled down to work, I became an importer. The first thing was to find a wife, because I had to normalize. And so I went looking on the continent for a wonderful girl, and I found one in Italy. I was working for a group of Spanish painters, and I was 18. And my wife was studying art at the Accademia in Florence, and she tripped over the bridge to get back to her mother's car with her mum in order to go back to lunch at home. And so she would pass me sitting in the middle of the bridge showing off watercolors and drawings, and she would stop to chat. And every day she stopped, I would ask her to help me translate into Italian or persuade someone to buy a picture. And I did very well, and she was helping. And I even told her at one point, come back tomorrow and I'll give you 10%. She never got the money, but we did come very close. And then we went on, after I went back to England, we went on corresponding. And I took her skiing in Switzerland at one point, with my father and other family members there as chaperones. And then eventually I asked her to marry me when I was taking her back to Italy. And we snuck off and married in Geneva in secret without telling anybody until the very, very last moment. And then we started a family back in London. And it just grew and grew before 4 children. And then eventually, much later, of course, 10 grandchildren. So I'm now a family man on quite a large scale.
Yeah.
But so she was the secondary kind of release, if you like, from that burden of, carrying my father on my back.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. So beautiful to see you finding your way, the voice of God, into helping others, and then finding your wife. Thank you for sharing that. Really powerful. You mentioned there that uh, you know your father was still accompanying you on trips and things like that.
Yes.
And I suppose
Yes.
there's a part of me that's that is struggling a little bit with that idea of
Yes.
what happened, and that you sort of
Yes.
went on
Yes.
as normal. Can you
Uh,
can you speak to me a
I
bit about that?
it's strange. I never stopped loving him, really.
Mm,
Um, I sort of I tried to understand his reasoning, his motivations, and he was a strange man. He was a bit of a dinosaur. He was a really 19th century creature, not a 20th century creature. And he believed he had a kind of divine right, I think, um, to behave as he wanted with his children and others' children. He didn't feel any compulsion about it. And he was quite a religious man in some ways, but somehow he made peace with God over making use of children. I don't know how he did that. And I
mm,
wrote about it in the book I published in 2014, A Humour of Love.
mm,
Um, Quite a bit of the book is to do with trying to understand the motivations um, and also understand the family not reporting, because it seems so important to me that children should be protected, not only myself, but 10 or 12 other children that came after me who my father abused, or before me, I then discovered. Um, they could have been protected from that man who should have gone to prison.
mm, mm,
And we are much too lax about um, insisting on family members, of course, also institutions, schools, club leaders, and everything else, but also in the home. Parents must be prepared to declare that their partners or uncles or whatever else have abused their children.
mm.
It can't be allowed to just happen and be ignored.
No,
And
no.
that's why I gave evidence to the inquiry
Mm,
in 2017. And it was quite difficult to do because there were about 75 people there. Um, but I took them through just as I'm describing it now, all the circumstances. And I said that we really need to have mandatory reform. We must have um, a law that makes it a crime not to declare when someone has acted in a predatory way towards children.
mm,
Um, Otherwise, in each generation, if you take the average that a predator abuses as 10, let's say, in each generation, the predatory behavior will double because one person abuses, and out of those 10 who are abused, 2 on average go on to abuse in the next generation.
mm. Thank you, Robin, and yeah, bless you for sharing at the inquiry. We'll come on to that in a bit. I've got some questions though, just staying, early years. So you mentioned prep school, and then you mentioned senior school. What age were you when you went off to prep school?
I was 8
Eight.
and
Yeah.
I finished at 12.
Yeah.
Um, and then senior school started at 12 and went on to, well, 17 or 18, depending on your age.
Mm,
But I left at 16. I couldn't take it anymore when I was 16, and I
yeah.
refused to go back. I studied A levels under protest in London, and that was partially successful. I managed to scrape through English and French. Um, and then I took myself off on a long holiday in Portugal to uh, you know, find myself, I suppose you might
Mm,
say. And
mm,
then
thank you.
I did, I mean, various other influences have come into a force. One was that um, I started a charity myself
Mm,
when I was 50, after I finished being an importer for 20 odd years. I retrained as a psychotherapist in London, 4-year training, but part time, and 2 years of actual practice, providing a family therapy service for Wandsworth Council. Um, and so I then started a charity which in Dorset, which began with a team of 4 counsellors sitting in a room, seeing families together. And then it grew and grew, and we took it to, first of all, we set up a board, and then opened a charity. And then I went to see the NHS in Dorset with a group of therapists, and we explained the process and how we were going to invite people to come, but they had to pay £5 per session, regardless of income. And if they earned quite high sums of money, then they would pay a higher scale. And they liked it, and they started referring. The paediatricians started referring the doctors all across the county, and it just grew and grew for 10 years. And then I took it to other counties. We went to Somerset and Wiltshire and Hampshire, and I established teams in each county and their own therapists. So we ended up with about 70 therapists covering the whole of the southwest of England, doing their own casework, always following the same principle of £5 per session. And we had to find, as a charity, the rest of the money to give them a decent wage, which was £45, I think. So eventually we couldn't see the future far enough ahead. We could see 6 months ahead, but we couldn't get long-term funding. And the trustees took fright and decided to stop after 20 years. And we had to stop, sadly, last year. And no one was more miserable than the paediatricians because they were referring people all the time and finding that the kids were pretty successful in coming out of whatever it was that was bothering them.
Thank you. It's a really powerful service to, sort of think of trying to do it seen and heard with
Yes.
therapy,
Yes.
and you're just really honouring your work there. I mean, can you trace that right back to those early years in boarding school, counselling others, supporting others?
Yes, it was very similar
Yeah.
in some respects. It was a bit more formal.
Yeah,
We didn't do kangaroo courts or anything like that.
No.
Usually 6-session work, and usually involving the family, not just the child.
Of course.
I was very keen on the idea that kids on their own can't really do very much for themselves. They need the family around them who are going to help make life better. So you really want more the merrier when you're doing that kind of work. And in training, I met some of the great people in family therapy from America and all over the world. And they came to lecture, and I met them, and that was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. There's been, thousands of people out there who've been supported, who, have different lives. So
Yes.
thank you for that work.
Yes.
And
Yes.
with your school, what Seen and Heard do, supporting boarding and independent school pupils, ex-pupils. You went to prep school, to senior school, reflecting back on the system that allowed such widespread abuse to go on, often teachers and pupils, but also pupil on pupil. What do you make of the boarding system?
Well, the problem is that teachers don't want to betray each other, and they may come across knowledge that someone else is mistreating a child. And when you look at when they think about their loyalties, they do the minimum. They do the minimum almost always. I mean, what teacher is going to tell about another teacher who they like, they get on with, they've spent years making friends? I'm afraid it usually is the same old story. And that's why we have to have a law that actually makes it a criminal offence to say nothing. I had an amusing situation the other day because the headmaster of Eton sent out a notice about a master who was going through the courts because of abuse of a child. And so I contacted him to say I did this kind of work in the 1960s and helped a lot of children at school. And I'm happy to tell you that I never found that any teachers were responsible for. So I'm sorry to hear that you have one at the moment, but we didn't have one then. Not that I heard about, at any rate. And he contacted me back because I told him that I gave evidence at the inquiry, and he said that he was in full support of the idea of mandatory reporting.
Interesting.
And that was lovely to hear, because you wouldn't expect a man in that position to take quite that attitude, but he did.
Mm. For
Bravo to
those
hear.
listening, just to help a little bit with mandatory reporting. So this is the mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse. The legislation is there is some legislation in the police and crime bill which is going through now. With recording this in February 2026, it's a very watered down version of mandatory reporting that's in there. It doesn't include criminal sanction for failing to report, which, as Robert said, is one of the key tenets of it. It doesn't include much protection for whistleblowers, um, and it doesn't include known or suspected abuse. So, which is a huge one, because you know children do not usually come forward um, for abuse, and perpetrators are not usually caught in the act. It's a it's for adults to notice things that are different, things that are going wrong, the child withdrawing, not wanting to go to certain places. So, the law that's there at the moment that's going through is not fit for purpose. However, it will put something on the statute books this year, likely, that then amendments can be hung on
Yes,
to
yes,
improve it. But
yeah.
thank you for mentioning that. I think, for the
Well,
yeah.
they should have gone further. I mean, having set up an inquiry which ran for years and years and cost an awful lot of money, the government, the Conservative government then, didn't pay any attention,
No.
didn't put anything to Parliament. And mandatory reporting should have come in straight away, but it didn't. And it took
Mm,
a Labour government to actually introduce it, and good good thing they did. Whatever form it takes, it's a start.
to
But there
start,
are
yeah.
places in Australia, parts of Queensland, I think, they have mandatory reporting for the domestic setting, and the incidents of child sex have gone down dramatically. And that's what you are looking for. That's what's needed. Um,
Mm. So
uh,
thank you, Robert. In the bit you were just talking about a minute ago, when you wrote to the head of Eden, and you said, in your experience, it wasn't the teachers predating on the pupils. At Seen and Heard, we see thousands of people each year. Around 30 to 35% have experienced sexual abuse at school, and then within that group is you know
yes,
roughly a 50-50 split between those who were abused by
yes.
pupil and those who were abused by teachers.
Well, that was my experience in senior school. This is 12 to 18. It's usually the older boys,
Mm.
if they're particularly in single-sex schools, or older girls if it's in girls' schools. In prep school, of course, it can only be the masters and the women, because the children are too young to molest each other,
Mm.
um, except in a few cases, right at the top of the school for the very mature ones. But normally it's the masters, and they have a field day, absolute
Mm.
field day. And if you read Earl Spencer's book about his school life, you will see what happened in his school, Maidstone, I think it was called.
Yeah, that's right.
And I know Alex Renton has done an enormous amount of work on school abuse all over the country.
He has,
And
yeah.
that's wonderful that these things are being found out, at least in part. Of course, it's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
It is. We know that. I mean, from the inquiry, only 1 in 9 child sexual abuse survivors ever speak up, ever come forward. And on average, it takes 25 to 30
Mm.
years for people to speak up. So because of that, whenever you see someone, bravely disclosing what happened, they are the tip of the iceberg,
Mm.
really, what's underneath. Yeah.
I have a theory about the predators. and what causes them to do as they do. And I think it's very often because they literally fall in love with with the victim, with the abused child, and that of course gives them a perfect excuse to say, well, I fell in love. I'm sorry, but I'm sorry if the child was 12 or 10 or 8, but I fell in love. What can I do? And of course, it's not a defense, and not a proper defense, but it's what going through their own mind. And it's very, very difficult for them to avoid that temptation. But what we have to do is to get those people into therapy and work on that. I worked with a man who had abused his children, not sexually, but physically, and we traced back the reason. He'd been abused himself as a child by um, a native man in New Guinea, and the New Guinean household servant had told him that it was their custom for boys to learn sex from men, and it was his normal tribal custom. Whether or not that was true is another question, because it prepared them for being men. And well, as soon as we realized the link between that and the behavior towards his children, he could see what he was doing, transferring the kind of the love object into a hated object, and one that should not be allowed, like a devil, and therefore would want to beat. And then, of course, all of that then collapses as soon as it's consciously recognized, and he's able to continue without that kind of behavior.
Mm.
And all these predators could be being handled in the same way, and dismantle that loving feeling. And it's why I call my book A Humour of Love, because that's what it is. It's the person has got into a humour, or a condition, a humour of love, which in our eyes allows them to do what they will.
Thank you for your thoughts there, Robert. So with your father then, did he go through the boarding school system?
Oh, very much so, yes. And he was most probably abused by his own father as a child. His own father certainly abused the girls in the family. And although I never spoke to him about this, I never dared to actually broach the subject at all. But that's very, very likely that that's the way he was brought into the practice.
Thank you. Thank you. So moving on, to look at your life, we've heard about the book, we've heard about the charitable work. To become a therapist, so you were in the import business for a while, then around 50, sort of retrained. When you retrain, or when you train as a psychotherapist, you have to do a lot of your own work. You have to do a lot
Yes,
of your own sessions,
yes,
and then you have
yes,
supervision afterwards, etc. So
yes.
having been, at boarding school all through your childhood, having experienced this awful abuse, what were you unpacking, and what really helped you to, as you started to do your own work, what really helped?
Well, it helped enormously when I was training to have around me the other people who were training as well. And we used to unpack our life histories and whatever in front of each other with the tutor. And so it was a perfect example of family therapy, because I was standing in front of a board explaining what happened to me, with my father, and tracing the origins of abuse through the family. And it was all done in a setting which allowed everyone to chip in and ask questions. You don't normally have that in therapy because you have one therapist sitting across the table. So that was a useful way to go about sort of exposure, and to look at the difficulties you might get in dealing with clients, and how to manage your own, conduct. So that was a useful thing to do.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. With a lot of ex-boarders, whether there's abuse in their backgrounds or not, I mean, I just look at my life, my 5 or 6 different addictions over the years that I, managed through now, but they were prevalent, whether it's workaholic, alcoholic, sex addiction, porn, smoking, junk food, difficult relationship with food, all sorts of different things. Was there anything you carried out into the world that made life harder for you, for your family over the years?
I think of being surrounded by a loving family, from whom you're not separating. I mean, if I'd had partners who came and went, I would have found that impossible. And I have great sympathy for people who just can't manage that kind of recovery process. But
No.
certainly having a loving family around you makes an enormous difference. But also practicing writing, relieving yourself that way, going through therapy yourself. I went through sort of years of personal therapy
Mm.
after I finished training. I was never given that opportunity as a child, unfortunately, except when I was about 16, long after the abuse, long after I recovered myself and my own feelings. My mother decided to send me to a rather famous psychoanalyst in London. Um, and he was really interested in my dream world. So I had to go through every time I came. I went through my latest dreams, and he was very disappointed if I didn't have any. But I had in mind the fact that he was also seeing my mother separately,
Right.
and that anything I said might get back to her ears. So if I dreamed about uh, her sex life with a partner of hers, and wanting to chop off their heads or something of that sort, um, I was a bit afraid to bring it out.
Yeah.
But anyway,
A
we
bit
got
of a
through it.
conflict. Yeah, a bit of a conflict there between, sort of seeing. Usually, therapists don't tend to see people in the same families, do they? But
No, it was completely wrong.
yeah,
It
mm,
just happened that he had seen her for 25 years.
right, right, yeah. And thank you for
Um,
sharing some of your journey as well into psychotherapy. Um, I always find it interesting. In my coaching, I attract sort of certain kinds of people with certain kinds of challenges that are coming up. Most of them are very close to my own, the ones that I've worked through in my life. And sometimes as well, they will say you attract people into your practice who have gifts for you, have things that you need to learn. And I believe
yes.
that. Um, who did you mainly work with over the years, and kind of what were you giving to them, and what were they bringing you?
You mean therapists?
Yeah. Well, as a therapist, what sort of clients,
Oh, I
would you?
see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I saw a big mixture of adults and children.
Mm,
Uh, I always saw children with either mother or father or both,
mm,
um, and sometimes with an older brother or sister or a younger brother or sister. Um, but when I've been working with adults, I mean, I see all kinds to do with depression or to do with uh, loneliness or to do with obsession of some sort. Um, so it's always fun as a therapist to have new people because they take you in different directions,
mm,
and no two pieces of work are the same. Um, and with children, I use some techniques that I've developed myself, um, which I find quite helpful. There's something called the problem pizza, where I lay out pieces of cardboard in different sizes that can form a ring like a pizza. And we put names to the different issues that the child feels they have, but also we go around the family asking if they would like to suggest one, and then the child decides whether it should fit in or not. And so we can build up a kind of world map of all the different afflictions. Um,
mm,
Usually, a degree of bullying is one, for example, at school, and there might be a health issue which should be named. There might be a struggle going on between mum and dad that should be named. and you try and get all the elephants in the room, if you like, and put them on the table. And then you've got, you can look at them on each session. You can look at them in more detail.
Problem pizza. Thank you for sharing that. It's really
Problem pizza
interesting.
has worked well
Yeah,
with
very
many,
good.
many hundreds
Yeah,
of kids. Yeah.
because so sort of going up in the helicopter, if you like, to look across, seeing so many families, children over the years. Um, what do children need, and when they end up, in a room seeing you where perhaps something they're not well, things aren't right. What do children need, and what is going wrong for children?
They sometimes indicate that there is something that they can't speak about in front of parents. And
Mm,
I then ask parents if they would mind if they had a few minutes, if they wish to speak to me without them being present. And that has sometimes brought into focus, sexual feelings or other feelings that they don't like to share.
mm,
Um, and that's useful.
mm,
But I sort of follow it's a postmodern training that I did. So it's very much anti-medical. We don't use medical terminology. And it's very much narrative as well. It's to do with the story you want to tell about yourself and that you want to promote.
mm,
And that's following um, the guys in Australia and New Zealand, um, David Epstein and Michael White,
mm,
and the work that they did. Um, and you can externalize, you can actually try and put the problem outside of the head of the child, and so that you can target it and plan how you're going to overcome it, as though it's a separate thing. It's not part of the self.
mm,
Um, there are lovely techniques of working in a helpful way rather than looking at all the issues or problems. You look at what works well and
mm,
you develop that into a new concept that overcomes everything else.
Interesting. Thank you. I mean, we called Seen and Heard. Well, I called Seen and Heard because that's what I believe children should be. Whereas typically, I believe society doesn't allow them to be fully seen, heard, and appreciated for who they are. We kind of
Yeah.
they come into the world fully formed. We chip bits off them to fit the mold, society, family, etc., and they end up so far away from themselves they're no longer happy. That's my simple version of it. What's your sort of take on that?
Well, yeah, there are lots of ways in which you bring your influence to bear, and I've tried to do it in my family, but of course they don't like having a psychotherapist
Yeah.
giving an opinion, so they try to insist that I'm grandpa and not and not a professional, as it were, which is so
Yeah.
they put me in my place, which is probably the right place to be. But it's a pity sometimes when you think, I know how to handle this as a professional. I know what question to ask next. And we can go down a better path.
Mm,
But you're not able to use that, um, sadly. I am all in favor, by the way, of social media being banned until kids are 15.
mm,
Um, I think there's far too much being put on them. Um, and this latest idea of being able to undress them and show them to other people with a A1 AI intelligence
mm.
is horrific. That's made the problem far worse than it already was. Um,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
very
so
troubling.
I'd rather cut them out completely until they're 15.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Robert. I mean, I've been a member of Smartphone Free Childhood since they got going, and I very much reflect that as well. I just don't think smartphones have a place in childhood, and definitely not social media. So yeah, really hear you on that. With the time we've got, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the book. The Humour of Love. Um, even in the title itself, you're showing a very evolved he sort of healed and slightly professional view of what happened to you as a young person. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book and what readers can expect from it?
Well, I went through many stages of writing it, or many drafts. I started my first draft when I was about 16,
Wow.
and that's how I described the book, as writing it as a 16-year-old, trying to
Mhm.
make sense of life in a ruined castle outside Rome, um, where I found myself at 16. Um, I tried to write a version then, and I done many since. But it was only after I trained as a therapist, particularly as a family therapist, using reflexive questions, um, such as conditional questions, sort of what if questions, past related questions, future related questions. I mean, there's a whole gamut of them. Um, it was only when I could bring that to bear that I started coming at it from different angles, hearing different voices, so as I could speak, as it were, in the book to the the doctor, the family doctor. Why didn't the family doctor feel that this behaviour had to stop in my father? What was my mother's point of view? What was happening for different members of the family? And it's that multitude of voices which really helps the book, I think. Um, yeah. So when I finally wrote it, and I was going to still write it as a novel until pretty close to the end, but my wonderful publisher, Nai Matala, who has now died, told me that if I wanted it to be powerful and to have meaning for people, I had to write it as a biography, as a memoir, as an autobiography.
Mm.
And that's what the last version came out. But I had to show it to members of my family, I felt, before I released it. And I got one very strong complaint from my brother, who has since died, sadly, saying that it can't have been as bad as you actually tell it. You know, it wasn't as bad as that, and I had to tell him it was, and worse, not better.
Mm. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, I mean, everything, whether it's the boarding school side of things, whether it's the abuse side of things, when you're a child, it's the normalization. You only know your world, and so the things that are happening, um, y- there's no almost no way to question it. Nothing outside of you. Just start to accept things. This is the way things are, and it's only with some distance, with some space, you look and go, okay, that was not okay.
Yeah,
But yeah, thankfully your sisters, from what you were saying earlier, picked up um, on the incident in the bath with your father, and then that started to lead to a place where the family doctor and things started to become more out into the light. But the normalization that I with clients that I work with, where it's abuse or boarding school stuff, was, wow, that's just the way it was. Or it was a bit of rough and tumble, or it
yeah,
was a bit of hanky panky. The language minimizes and diminishes
yeah.
what is very severe abuse.
It happens often in hostage families when kids or near adults are abducted, uh, and they often grow to like or love their kidnappers,
Mm,
because it's sensible to grow to like, at least, the people who are imprisoning you, because you want to get around them and persuade them not to harm you.
mm,
Um, and it's a understandable process, actually, to fall in love, um, if the opportunity is in place.
mm,
Um, so we should be sympathetic to people who are taken as hostages.
mm.
Uh, it can
Yeah,
happen.
you're right. Yeah, that Stockholm syndrome is very yeah, it's very powerful, isn't it?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. So, as we start to bring things to a close, um, you is your journey, your sharing in the book itself is very very powerful, very raw. The work that you've done at the independent
Yeah.
inquiry, the work you've done as a therapist, just really want to honor that journey that you've been on. What would you like to see? You've mentioned mandatory reporting. Is there anything else you would like to see, as whether it's looking after young people or whether it's around, mental health or society? Is there anything you'd like to see in the world?
Well, I'd like to see a lot more money put towards helping children with mental health
Mm,
disorders, because uh, we're not giving enough attention to that. And
mm,
it's our lifeblood, it's our future. Um, we want to have a healthy family in the next century. We've got to invest in therapy for kids who are struggling.
mm,
And we've got to stop the bullying in schools. We've got to be much tougher on the bullying in schools, because we've no idea how bad that is. Uh, if you are on the inside of it, like that little boy was that I sort of rescued when he was not daring to go to his room, um, it's life threatening. They could go out of a window. Those
mm,
people.
mm,
We must protect them better. Yeah, there's so many things it would be good to do, isn't it? Um, if
mm,
anyone wants to read my book, it's still available on Amazon, but they
mm.
want £120 for it, I think.
Oh
Uh,
my goodness.
but I do have some copies here, which I can give out at a more reasonable price. Um,
We'll put some contact details in the show notes so that people, can get hold of you. You've mentioned you're happy
yeah,
sharing your
they can
email. Yeah.
they can email me, and I'm happy to reply.
Mm. Thank you, Robert, and thank you so much for today. Thank you for,
So, my
sharing
pleasure.
your journey.
Well,
It's
thank you for the work you're doing, Chris, because it's very much needed.
mm,
Bringing people together and getting them to speak about their experiences.
yeah, yeah, it's so important. I believe now that we are on an upward trajectory as a race. It's going to be very, very tough for a few years whilst the old ways drop
Mm.
away. But there is a new heart-centered, compassionate movement, I think, and
But we've got to stop those predators from doubling in each generation.
yeah.
That's the task we need to have our focus on.
Very powerful message. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, let's finish there. But thank you so much, Robert Montagu, for your time, your energy, your work, for your story, and thank you so much to everyone for listening. It's been the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I'm Chris Braitch. I've been with Robert Montagu today, and if you want to find out a little bit more about Robert's work or get hold of him, please look in the show notes for his email address and the book. So thank you, Robert.
Bye bye.
Bye,
Bye,
and thank you
everybody.
everyone at home. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.